Title Fight, the band that introduced an entire generation of kids to hardcore and shoegaze. For better or for worse. Title Fight hasn't been active for years, but they are still one of the most talked about bands in the scene. When people talk about bands they want to see reunite, it's always the same two: Modern Baseball and Title Fight. I already did a video about Modern Baseball, so please feel free to check that one out, but today I'm going to try to find out why people love Title Fight. I feel like most people, myself included, first heard Title Fight around the early 2010s, right around the time The Last Thing You Forget was released. And yes, I know that The Last Thing You Forget is really a compilation album that includes 3 Title Fight EPs. Relax, you nerd. I actually still remember the first song I heard, and it was No One Stays on Top Forever, and up to that point, I had never really heard anything like it. The slow intro, the fast, punky second half of the song, the gritty vocals. I was hooked. And I think that happened for a lot of people, because a lot of the songs on The Last Thing You Forget, a lot of those songs are pop punk. Dark and gritty pop punk, sure, but still pop punk. I see you shaking your head, but it's okay. Songs like Symmetry, Neck Deep, Memorial Field, come on. Title Fight leaning into the catchiness, having a lot of songs that you can sing along to, that is what helped them stand out. We all know the 2010s is known for being a pop-punk revival, bands like The Story So Far, The Wonder Years, Man Overboard, but if you wanted something more intense, something that was gritty, but it was also poppy, that was Title Fight. Other hardcore bands were just too intense for the pop-punk kids at the time, which led to Title Fight being a lot of people's introduction into hardcore. Title Fight was like the gateway drug for a lot of people getting into hardcore. But not me. I listened to H2O way before I ever heard of Title Fight. Title Fight was the cool band. If you didn't want to listen to those breakup songs from The Story So Far and Man Overboard, you could be cool and edgy and listen to Title Fight. Then on Shed, Title Fight just expanded their easily digestible hardcore with songs like Shed, 27, and Stab. But you also had songs like Crescent-Shaped Depression, Where Am I, Safe in Your Skin, that showed the slower, atmospheric side of Title Fight, the shoegaze side of Title Fight. And it was kind of shocking to me that a lot of the shoegaze stuff from Shed is in Title Fight's top songs on Spotify. And I feel like Floral Green was the band's big coming out party, almost like a major label debut. It's kind of hard to describe, but with Floral Green, it just feels like it's Title Fight at their most Title Fight. And it's also not too much, you know what I mean? Like, a new listener could have listened to the entire album and they wouldn't get overly intense screaming or heavy music just for the sake of catering to older fans. Listening to the album again in full, it just feels like everything was done on purpose. And could you imagine if rock radio wasn't run by idiots? I mean, Secret Society is like the perfect radio rock song. It should have been played on every radio station that's alternative rock or X95.4, whatever. It should have been played on every rock station on the planet. And I know I've talked about this on the channel before, but when it comes to rock radio, it's personal. I went to college for communications, journalism, radio, all that stuff. And I remember being in college during the 2010s and hearing these speakers would come in who worked in rock radio, and they're just playing the same bands from the 90s, you know, every 5 minutes you're listening to Smells Like Teen Spirit over and over and over again. Like, can you imagine if The Story So Far, Title Fight, Modern Baseball, Touche Amore, Joyce Manor, the Menzingers, all of these bands were played on rock radio? Ugh. Sometimes I think about that and it makes me sad. Would have been a whole different world. If we're talking about Floral Green, you know the one song that I have to talk about. Head in the Ceiling Fan. Up to this point, definitely the most shoegaze song Title Fight ever made, and I don't think it's a coincidence it's track 5 on the album, sitting pretty much right in the middle. It was like Title Fight dipping their toes in the water of shoegaze, seeing how fans would react. As someone who was in college when this album came out, I don't remember much talk about Head in the Ceiling Fan, at least nothing overly negative, mostly because Floral Green gave you plenty of old school fast Title Fight songs. And I know Head in the Ceiling Fan always gets the attention, but the last 2 songs on the album, Lefty and In Between, are also pretty shoegaze as well. And now we get to Hyperview. I remember when this album came out and there were basically 2 opinions. 1, you loved the album, or 2, you thought Hyperview was a slow, boring mess. In my opinion, I'm not the biggest fan. I always felt like Title Fight went too shoegaze with Hyperview, too atmospheric. The vocals have that kind of same effect on every song that I didn't really like, and the vocals also feel muffled too. And sometimes I think people dismiss Hyperview as a slow album, but there are fast songs on it, but they all feel like they have this shoegaze effect still hanging over them. For example, I'd love to hear a more raw version of Rose of Sharon or Trace Me Onto You. Because of the shoegaze connection, a lot of people compare Hyperview and Peripheral Vision by Turnover, and what Turnover did that was so smart was, up until that point, Turnover was a pretty clear-cut pop-punk band, but with Peripheral Vision, they kept the same lyrics or song topics or subjects, right? Love songs, breakup songs, all the good stuff. But they changed their sound, but they kept the catchiness. And that was the key for Peripheral Vision. Turnover, just like Title Fight, changed their sound, but there is almost no one that dislikes Peripheral Vision compared to all the criticism that Hyperview gets, because Peripheral Vision may have been different, but it wasn't unfamiliar to fans of Turnover, and I think that's the big difference. I'll throw another comparison out there. I always thought that Hum was like the perfect mix of shoegaze and catchy rock and roll. I still think Stars is one of the best rock songs ever. And sure, you'd prefer An Astronaut is probably more on the rock and roll side, more, I know this is going to sound weird, but it has that 90s sound for obvious reasons, but you can't tell me if you listen to Inlet and listen to, Step Into You or In the Den, and you don't hear that atmospheric shoegaze sound. And I always felt like Hum really just kind of understood the assignment, the mix of rock and roll and shoegaze. A lot of people talk about the Spring Songs EP as this holy grail of Title Fight before they became bad, but for me, none of those songs really stand out to me. Now, that EP is literally where you can hear the band make that shift into shoegaze, but let's not pretend it's the best thing that Title Fight ever did. So why do people love Title Fight? I think it comes down to that the songs still hold up, and there's a little nostalgia. Title Fight never made this big announcement that we're breaking up and we're never getting back together. Ironically enough, they quietly faded away like the ending of a really good shoegaze song. Since Title Fight was a lot of people's introduction into hardcore, it makes sense for a lot of people to be nostalgic for Title Fight. Give it a few years and all the bands from the 2010s are going to be headlining When We Were Young. And Title Fight was unique in the sense that they played pop punk, punk rock, hardcore, shoegaze, emo, indie. They pretty much covered every popular genre of music in the 2010s, so odds are you at least liked one Title Fight song. So what should Title Fight sound like if they do reunite? I think that first song has to be a more traditional Title Fight song. It has to be, fast, intense, because as much as it would be a great day on the internet if Title Fight finally reunited and put out a new song and it's this slow, atmospheric, quiet 7-minute song, I don't really think that would help Title Fight. I actually think now is a perfect time for Title Fight to come back. It seems like hardcore and shoegaze are kind of having a moment right now, definitely a rise in popularity compared to recent years. I mean, Knocked Loose is having such a massive rise in popularity right now. If any band has a chance to break into the mainstream, you have to go with Knocked Loose at, right now in current time. And it feels like more and more people are talking about hardcore too. At least that's what I see on my timeline. More people talking about bands like Buggin', End It, Speed. So right now would be, I think, a perfect time for Title Fight to come back, because right now there's such an appreciation for hardcore and shoegaze, the two styles of music that Title Fight is so synonymous with. And I also feel like there's this big void of rock music in the mainstream. Usually when people talk about rock music and, stuff that they're nostalgic for, it's usually the Black Parade or Riot is like the last time that rock was really in the mainstream. And again, Knocked Loose is probably our best bet for a band to kind of break through into that next level of popularity. But a band like Title Fight already has that entrenched hardcore fan base that wants them to come back so bad. And maybe if Title Fight does come back, you can have at some point all of this great music that we all love. In my mind, it just can't stay underground forever. At some point, it has to break back through into the mainstream, and would probably would almost be easier for a band like Title Fight because they already have, as opposed to like a brand new band that doesn't have that groundswell of support, a band coming back like Title Fight, coming out with new music, that might be a great opportunity to break back into the mainstream. I mean, I have friends all the time asking me for new rock bands and new recommendations because there is no mainstream outlet for casual fans of rock music to hear up-and-coming rock bands. It's basically go viral on TikTok or nothing. Ned from Title Fight is currently in a band, Glitter, and they just released their new album, Rationale, and it's the best Title Fight album we've gotten in years. All jokes aside, I would call this album a very good rock album, but I know that label doesn't really work anymore. I guess it's not good for SEO. Everything has to be such a specific subgenre. So how to describe this album? I would say it's a little bit Title Fight, a little bit shoegaze, a little bit rock, and maybe like a hint of the Hold Steady? Yeah, that's what I'm going to go with. And drummer Ben Russin is playing in Citizen. And I feel like Citizen's last album is pretty underrated. I didn't really see anybody talking about it. Again, I would call it a good rock album. Don't let nostalgia get in the way. If you want to learn more about the 2010s emo and pop punk revival, I did an entire video about it, and you can check the link out in the description. Please like the video, it really helps me out, and it lets YouTube know to push this video to more people who like emo, pop punk, punk rock, and hardcore. Please share the video, please subscribe if you haven't, and thanks for watching.